Hi, this is Lars from SSW TV. I'm here with Julie Lohman at the beautiful Grand America Hotel in Salt Lake City, and we are at the Pluralsight Author Summit, where we get to pick each other's brain. And I'm going to pick Julie's brain on Entity Framework 7 in particular, because Julie's bag, if those who don't know Julie, is a lot about data. So, just to start off, Entity Framework 7, is it here now? Or what are we doing? Is it coming?
Entity Framework 7 is on its way. We're currently Entity Framework 6, and that's going to be around for a long time. Entity Framework 7 is the first time in the history of the evolution of Entity Framework that Entity Framework isn't just evolving. They're doing a real refresh of it because they're working with this really old code base, and in order to get all the innovations they've put into it in the last bunch of years, it's been a lot of duct tape and, and they were getting into a lot of technical debt. And also it was limiting them in terms of not just adding new kinds of features, but also making some improvements that people have been asking for a long time, that the current code base was just, the way things worked was just too hard. So it's, a little scary for people, and it's a little exciting for other people. Not bad, not car crash exciting, but like, oh, I can't wait to use it. One of the reasons is because it will be bringing in a lot of great not only new technologies, new capabilities like, hey, I use Entity Framework a lot, and I just want to do some stuff with a NoSQL database or with some non-relational data. It's actually going to give you that capability. It's not going to magically hide, like try to make everything exactly the same, but some of the top-level stuff. And it's going to be really lightweight. So it won't, for example, presume you are going to use SQL Server. So it's going to be lightweight and composable. Solving some problems like being able to use do bulk inserts and deletes, some of those kinds of things. So it's going to be, well, I should get this part over with. It will not be backwards compatible with existing code. That's the freak out part. There's some big things that won't come forward. For example, that old, really base layer object context API, and that we've had since the beginning, and then that more streamlined DB context API that came with EF 4.1 that sat on top of the object context API, now will just have the DB context. So if you've still got old code with object context, that won't work anymore. Right?
So if you're on 4.1, you're still okay, or?
Well, if you're from 4.1 forward and you're using DB context, because it's still technically possible. Since 4.1 came out, the Entity Framework team enabled and encouraged people to start new projects using DB context, but it was still backwards compatible with object context, so it wasn't forcing anybody to do it. But it was, if you've got code and you don't want to have to deal with changing it, it'll still work. Right, but if you're doing something new, we really recommend using the DB context. It's more streamlined. It's more logical. There's not the surface area is more fine-tuned to what it turns out people are using the most often, and many of the new improvements that came after that were with DB context. They didn't bother going down to object context. So another big thing is that, so the object context is kind of a big clunky thing that's going to go away. There's still there were some things in that lower level API that we needed to get to sometimes, so that's now just going to be built into the single API that we have. The other big change that some people are saying, hooray, and other people are like, oh my God, what are we going to do, is Microsoft and Entity Framework by default is, not by default, I shouldn't say that. Entity Framework will no longer have the EDMX, that designer-based model.
Really?
So the way Entity Framework works, just a very high level, is you define a model one of two or three ways. We'll say three ways. One is using the designer, and you can either reverse engineer a database and get a designer-based model, the EDMX, or using the designer where you define the model in the designer, generate your database schema from there. So that's defining the model. Also, the other way is through the code first workflow.
Of course.
Right? So the code first workflow is a little bit of a misnomer. It can be you define your domain model in code, and then let migrations or database initialization handle that database for you. It's also possible to reverse engineer a database to code and a DB context, and then then the code first API will take over and enable Entity Framework to understand how to work with that. So what's going away is not the capability of reverse engineering a database. It's the capability of having that designer-based EDMX and Entity Framework understanding how to read that XML into memory and deal with that.
So there's no more EDMX?
There's no more EDMX by way of Microsoft. Okay, so there's third-party tools. DevArt has had a designer for quite a while that can be used instead of the Entity Framework designer that's in Visual Studio. LLBL Gen Pro has a designer that can be used. LLBL Gen Pro's designer already supports Code First, and Franz Buma is planning to, he probably is, maybe he's got that working already, but he's absolutely planning to support EF7 because he already understands how to work with it Code First. And DevArt said that last time I talked to them, they said they were definitely considering doing it. I don't know. I can't imagine that it won't. So I think if for people who have made that big investment in EDMX and they still want to be able to use it, it's just a matter, whether you want to use a designer or you just want to continue working, or you just want to use the EDMX that you have and let Entity Framework be able to understand that. There will be third-party solutions to do that.
So we're not going to get left in the lurch. Ish.
I think that it feels unfair to say, oh, it's no big deal, because to a lot of people it's a very big deal. It's really scary. So and they'll maybe have to pay money for another tool to move forward. But that might be, a few $100s or whatever, as opposed to what it might take to kind of refactor everything into Code First.
So it makes sense, this change, that you can see? Like they had to move forward in this direction?
Yeah, they had kind of run into a wall. So, we've all gotten into this situation where you just kind of one day accept that the technical debt is just way too high.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. So no,
painful.
It is painful.
When you've got clients depending on your APIs.
Yeah, and you have to make the switch, overnight. You can't just wait for it. Yeah. So now you said before that it's going to be much more lightweight, Entity Framework 7 or EF7. Is that in line with the vNext of .NET?
Yeah, absolutely. So it works. It will work with ASP.NET 5. ASP.NET 5 is a little confusing also because ASP.NET 5 has a new the new runtime. There's a runtime that actually really is the full .NET runtime, and then there's this core CLR.
Right.
And Entity Framework will work with both, either way. It works with full .NET Framework, but it will also work with the core CLR. Now, the thing about the core CLR is it's probably going to be a long time before people are really using it, at least the .NET programmers. Maybe, all those people that are OSS programmers that Microsoft is trying to lure with this and appeal to, it might enable them to come, and therefore the core CLR makes sense. But I think for a lot of .NET developers, it's going to be a long time. It might be some time before they get there. And also the core CLR is also evolving. So like this first iteration, who was it? Rick Strahl. I had a conversation with Rick Strahl about this, and he's been investing in learning ASP.NET 5 and writing about it. And he said it's almost like the experience we'll go through with a core CLR that is part of ASP.NET 5 might be like .NET 1. right?
Right, that's not a good similarity.
So, but ASP.NET 5. But eventually it got great. ASP.NET 5 though has the option of going one way or the other. So Entity Framework 7, what they did was they made a decision about the first release. They wanted it to align, since Core CLR was going to be able to come out, there was not going to be a data platform for it to run on. Entity Framework 6 depends on full .NET Framework. Yep. So Entity Framework 7 can use full .NET Framework, and it can be used with a Core CLR. So what they did was they kind of put a halt on all the rest of the innovation they were working on. They even set some stuff aside, the non-relational database support, the support to be able to run Entity Framework on Windows Phone and Windows Store. So they set that aside, and also some of the other features they wanted to bring in, because they started with something new, and then they're like, okay, all these things from ES6, we're going to, okay, we got this one in, we got this one in, we got this one in. We still have a few more, but we got to stop and make sure that when Core CLR first releases, this will work with it. So that initial release, I think they're saying, maybe first or second quarter 2015. I don't really know. I really, really, really don't know. I hope it's not first quarter, because that would mean next month, and I don't know about it being ready next month.
Right. No, fair enough. So is it, looking at the VNext for .NET, it's going to be all modular, and you can pick and choose what you want. It's all very, very small. Is it the same with Entity Framework?
Entity Framework has been broken up. So instead of it being one big API, one big Entity Framework.dll, Entity Framework 6 is entirely housed in there. So now it's broken up. So there's migrations. Well, actually, no migrations. They merged into relational. So there's an Entity Framework.relational API. It's actually a package, and not everybody's going to be using a relational database. No. So you'll only get that if you're using one of the relational database providers. If you're going to use like the Azure, they created some of the non-relational stuff while they were doing proof of concept, and that's the stuff that's been set aside. For example, Azure Table Storage. So I've worked with that. They did a Redis cache. That one I did not play with yet, but Entity Framework, it's not automated caching, but Entity Framework can, you can just say query, here's my store, and use the provider to point to the Redis cache and say, okay, just write a link query, and just do save changes, and you're working with a cache.
That's pretty powerful.
Yeah. So the various DLLs that are distributed by NuGet packages, it's just been broken up, so you get the pieces you need for the task that you want.
And that's especially important, because I'm from a mobile development background, and that's what you want, right? You want to have as little as possible to run on that small device. Yeah,
and then ASP.NET 5 is also going to be, you can run it on, right now, by way of Mono. Okay. Right? So you can run it on Linux, you can run it on OS X. Eventually, there's going to be another flavor of the CLR, so there's going to be the cross-platform CLR. Right. And, there's all that integration with Mono and Xamarin and everything happening.
And that's the way they're going with a lot of products. The Visual Studio 2015 comes with an Android emulator, so it makes sense that they're trying to break everything up, so you grab the bits you need, and then you go from there. And I'm guessing it'll be as easy as just adding another NuGet package if there's some feature you need.
I'll buy NuGet packages, and it'll, you just, for example, if you decide you are going to target SQL Server, you say that you want the NuGet package for AnyFramework.SQL Server, and it will, just like NuGet does, go, oh, well, in order to do that, then I need this, and that, and it'll just pull all those down for you.
So what can I do as a developer to prepare for EF7? Like, is there something I need to go and do now, or is it too early, or can I prepare so that I know what's going to happen?
Right now, and we're talking at the very beginning of March 2015, so I just want to be clear about that. Right now, I think the real thing to do is first of all, mentally prepare for it. Go see what's in there, what it's going to do, what its goals are, what its long-term goals are. You can certainly play with it. They've got some stable beta bits on NuGet, and they also have nightly builds.
Okay.
So you can look in there and, if you really want to play with it. I wouldn't write production code.
No.
It is not for production. As a matter of fact, when they do this initial release, it's like a version of a version. When they do this initial release of EF7 to go along with the core CLR, they're literally saying, don't, unless you want to, you have a real need to use that, don't bother with it, because this is going to be stripped down and streamed down. On the other hand, you may look at what is ready with EF7 at that time and say, that's everything I need, all I need. I know, for me, what's going to be in that initial release will be really close, but there's still some things I like complex types won't be supported yet. Right. And I'm like, oh, no value objects. Oh, so that's for me my style, right? But they're seriously, the Entity Framework team is saying, unless you're using ASP.NET 5, don't bother. And it's going to be marked as a pre-release.
So we're still early days. Still early days.
But I'm playing with it and doing demos with it, and knowing the work that I'm doing could change. I just finished up a course, a short, like 2.5-hour course for Pluralsight called Looking Ahead to Entity Framework 7. Okay. And as I got towards the end of the course, something major that I demonstrated in the beginning of the course, and I even highlighted, it's like, oh, that's interesting. That it's like that, and they changed that. Right? So I had to go back and do something with that. So that's it. Actually, if you've got 2.5 hours to invest, that's going a little deeper than some of the other stuff that you would see about it, because I really played with it. Plus, I also pulled down the packages of the stuff that they set aside. So I said, just, so you could see what it will look like, what's going to happen with the Windows Phone and Windows Store support, what it will look like to work with Azure storage, right? Because it's like, oh, why would I want to use an object relational mapper against a NoSQL store, right? So just to get an idea of kind of what that's all about.
And I think also Entity Framework traditionally has been for SQL developers, or developers that use a SQL backend.
SQL, right? Not just SQL Server, but
SQL of some, some way. So, bringing them across, or bringing the NoSQL people across to Entity Framework, that's going to be a bit of a challenge, I think.
Right, but bringing the people who are used to using Entity Framework and all of a sudden being able to take advantage of some of the benefits of a NoSQL database, because it's that easy. There's a lot more to understand about NoSQL, and a lot more you can do with it than the kind of the canonical features that would be supported. And that's really all they're going to do. It's like, look, we know how to query. And if you tell us, like Azure Table Storage, if you tell us that this property maps to the row, the partition key, and this one maps to the row key, then we know how to do the rest. It actually takes advantage of an API, a .NET API that already knows how to do that. So they're like, we'll kind of shortcut that for you.
So they leverage what's already there.
But they're not going to have migrations for it. They're not going to, first of all, it doesn't even make sense because Azure's table storage doesn't have a schema, right? There is no schema, right? So all that stuff doesn't even make sense. So they're not going to try to make the experience seem, mask the experience. So they're just taking kind of like the really high-level stuff that's really easy to do, and it's like, oh, I don't have to do all that extra work, and to just do some basic stuff with this NoSQL. Another cool thing is a store that they created an API for is in-memory store. So like you can do some simple testing, like what unit testing, without having to even like set up mocking or anything like that.
Wow, that's a bit of a mind-boggling thing. How does that work?
Like it just because it stores it in memory, and it kind of pretends that it's there. It pretends it's there in memory while you're running the test.
It creates like a false layer for testing. You just blow away.
And I don't know how deep it goes. I just did some simple stuff with it, and I was like, whoa! I didn't even have to I don't even have to use a mocking framework here, but I haven't taken that really deep to see where what it's good for and what it's not for.
And it might change anyway.
Basics.
it might change anyway.
And it might change anyway. And so all the stuff I'm doing, I'm looking at it that way. I'm like, and just getting a feel for it and planning ahead. Right, I can plan ahead, but I'm not writing any production code, and I'm not going to get crazy frustrated when something doesn't work, because it's it's still in flux.
It sounds pretty exciting. I mean, it sounds like it's going to ruffle a few feathers because it is a rewrite, but it also sounds like it's a necessity, especially for mobile platforms, to take advantage of it.
Yeah, and EF6 is not going away. I mean, the investment in it is going to reduce, naturally. But if you think about web forms, Windows Forms, right? Web Forms versus MVC. Web Forms are still there and supported. ADO.NET, right? Data. What are they called again? Data sets and data readers.
Data readers.
God, it's been a while. They're still there. Although one of the interesting advantages of EF6 is it is open source, right? So the EF6 is as well.
Oh, right, okay.
It's been on, that was, it's an open source project on CodePlex, and everything's, EF7 is on GitHub along with ASP.NET vNext. So it is open source. The team is still investing in it in terms of, fixing things and also attending to, they just did another slew of not just bug fixes and tweaks, but like a ton of stuff. Just not new big features, because all the new, they kind of got to the end of the kind of features they could implement, and that's why they're doing F7. But also, developers in the community can, continue submitting pull requests, and the team is dedicated to do that. So they're really recommending, especially, for now, if you're using ASP.NET 5, especially Core CLR, and you want to use, I actually figured out, I did this in my, did I do it in my course? I didn't do it in the course, I did it in my May MSDM Magazine Data Points column, because I wanted to see how it was possible to use EF6, because with the full .NET framework, ASP.NET 5, remember, has the full CLR and it has the Core CLR. So the full CLR, full .NET framework, EF6 works with that. So I figured out how to put that together.
Plug it in and,
Yeah, so I could actually still use that. And it's going to be a while before we get to that next kind of full, more feature-rich, more feature parity for EF7. So EF6 is going to be around long enough that I've actually this week had a conversation about something I've been thinking about doing for a while, is a full refresh of my courses that I've been building over the years, any framework courses, because it's kind of a patchwork now. So I'm going to do it. I'm actually going to invest the time in a full refresh of everything in, so it's an EF6 course from kind of beginning to end, because it's going to be around for a while and people are still going to be using it, and there'll be people who, will not, legacy, everything's, I feel bad saying, oh, EF6 is legacy. First of all, it is not legacy today. But on the other hand, the day after you release something, it's legacy.
That's right, and it goes into maintenance mode in some aspect, right?
So, yeah, and so EF6 is going to be around for a long time.
Oh, fantastic. No, it actually sounds pretty exciting. Some people don't really like data, but yeah, we can't get around it. Well, you live on data. So, no, this has been really interesting, Julie. I appreciate your insight into it, and obviously this may change. As you said, we're filming this early March 2015, so, but watch out for Julie's courses on Entity Framework, because they are getting a refresh. And this is happening within the next few months?
Well, it'll take me a while to do them, and I've got some things in between. But the looking ahead to Entity Framework 7 course should be out in another week or two.
Fantastic. So look out for that. It might even be live once this goes live. Yeah. Fantastic. Thanks for your time, Julie. It's been great.
Always a pleasure.
Fantastic. This is Lars from SSW TV. Thanks for watching. Cheers.
Did you get all that? We'll take the SSW TV quiz and test your knowledge now.